Are we going to see elections due in May cancelled, as of course we saw last year? Well, one person who certainly thinks they should not be cancelled is Matthew McKinnon, founder and director of the Centre for Welsh Studies. Matt, how are you, mate?
I'm very well, thanks, Michael. How are you?
Good. Well, I saw your petition about democracy must prevail. Can you give people an overview as to your perspective on whether these May elections are going to be or should be indeed delayed or not?
Well, I think they most definitely should go ahead. Whether that'll happen is a completely different story. There are many in the Welsh political establishment in Cardiff Bay that are keen to see these elections postponed by a few months. I think November will be the sort of month they'll try and delay it to. And there are many reasons for this. A lot of them are using the excuse of public safety, which is a valid excuse, I suppose, in the times of COVID. But they've had well over, 10 months now, 11 months since our first lockdown, knowing that something like this might happen and to prepare for it. And they've completely failed to do so. So for me, it's a question of now is why would they want to delay? Is it because the First Minister's poll ratings are down? Is it because Welsh Labour are losing their majority and they don't want that to happen? So if they think they can delay it, they can maybe get a bounce back of public opinion, change leader, who knows? But for me, it must definitely go ahead on May the 5th, the 6th, because it's been 5 years now and a lot has changed in the Welsh political landscape since then.
Yeah, before we get onto the sort of Welsh political side of it and what the elections are looking like, Matt, which I know you've got a lot of insight on, can I just ask you, in your petition, you state many in the Welsh political establishment are promoting the possibility of a delay in this year's elections. Is this something that's been increasingly talked about in Wales?
It is. I mean, it's been on ITV Wales, BBC Wales, and they are the main news outlets. Most people don't know Wales doesn't really have a big sort of press arena here. We mainly rely on sort of national outlets such as BBC and ITV to get our news. Although in Wales, there's a lot of meetings lately. I think a week ago was the first report of the new year, basically where some Senedd members, as they're now called, have come out and said, we don't think it should be delayed, but we should look at the possibility. So I think they're starting to sort of lay the groundwork for any potential delays. They don't want to admit that.
Matt, as I mentioned earlier, you've set up this petition urging that democracy must prevail, urging for the May elections to go ahead. Why do you feel so strongly about this?
Well, a lot's changed in Wales in the last 5 years since the Senedd elections of 2016. The political situation here is in flux. Brexit has changed a lot of that. We now see emerging parties like Abolish the Welsh Assembly Party polling to gain their first seats in the Welsh Parliament. The Conservatives had a pretty poor performance in 2016, really, and now they're polling to make some changes, some gains. Labour are really around the same sort of position they were then, and they should be really pulling ahead here. They are the establishment party in Wales, and they've had the last 5 years to really prove that, but they've wasted the 5 years trying to stop Brexit and other things.
Okay, Matt, so if you had to make a prediction, do you think these elections will go ahead in May or not?
No, I hope they can. I think Wales is very ready for an election. I think our political leaders need to be judged on their performance over the last 5 years. But I think they'll try and delay it, I think, until around November time.
Okay, presuming they do go ahead in May, or even if there's a delay, can you give an overview as to what you expect the political landscape to look like in terms of these sets of elections?
Well, I think the Conservatives in Wales will make some quite significant gains. In 2016, I think they were hit quite hard by the UKIP vote. I think they will increase their seats by maybe 40 or 50% up to the late teens, early 20s. I think Abolish will make a handful of gains. I know we've got the Reform Party now looking to sort of make manoeuvres in Wales. I saw they did their launch in Scotland a few days ago. It'll be interesting to see what sort of votes they are going to target in Wales and where they think they can sort of pick up seats, because there is potential space to gain seats in Wales on the regional lists. So that'll be a very interesting one. I think Plaid Cymru are holding on the same level they have been. They've not really made the inroads they've expected over the last 5 years, especially with their new leader, Adam Price. I think Labour are going to take a hit. Not a major hit, because they've still got the strongholds in the valleys, but I think they will take a dip.
And in terms of your the Centre for Welsh Studies, Matt, can you just tell people a bit about the background, why you set it up, and what sort of stuff you're doing over there?
So we launched out of the end of the 2016 European referendum campaign. I worked on the Vote Leave campaign as the director for Wales, and we saw that the Welsh political scene just did not represent public opinion on so many issues, and that there was very much a sort of establishment view. And unless you abided by that rule, you were sort of social outcasts on the political scene in Wales. So we launched a free market think tank that focuses on policies in Wales, such as the economy, free market ideas. What can we bring in Wales? Because a lot of people don't realise that Wales is struggling really economically behind the rest of the UK, really, in bringing in investment and development. And it's wholly reliant on government investment. I mean, if you come to places like where I live in Cardiff, you can really see that all the major investments that are happening in the city and the well-paid jobs are all public sector. They're not bringing in that private sector investment we really, really need in Wales, as they've seen in England, to really boost our economy and improve people's lives. So we look at areas like this and we produce research papers, we run campaigns, we work behind the scenes with politicians to try and get their input. We try and push that message out to the Welsh public.
And for those that aren't as familiar in terms of the politics in Wales, Matt, what's your view on the Welsh Parliament, how it's been operating, what it does? What's your view on that?
There's a big disenfranchisement in Wales. A lot of people aren't interested. I mean, the Senedd elections and previously, as it was known, the Welsh Assembly hasn't had over 50% really of a vote in any of its elections over the last 20 years. So a general election in Wales usually gets around the 70 or so percent, maybe 80, just shy of 80% in some of the areas. The Welsh elections don't even see really 50%. So there's clearly a lot of people in Wales that don't really think it has much power. But I think the danger in that is that they're underestimating that more and more powers are being devolved to Wales, and things are going to change quite rapidly. I think devolved governments in Britain are becoming quite powerful, as we've seen through COVID. They've been able to strong arm the Prime Minister and really try and, especially over Brexit as well, they've tried to strong arm the Prime Minister. So I think there is a mood now of people taking it a lot more seriously than they used to. And I think COVID has really sort of awoken a lot of people and made them realise that the Welsh Government isn't this small, glorified council chamber in Cardiff Bay. It actually is now quite a powerful institution.
Now, Matt, last year we obviously saw a lot of elections postponed till this year. What would you say to people who said that it'd be right to at least postpone them and possibly cancel them taking place again this year? What's your message to them? What would your argument be?
I say we need democracy to prevail. That was our overriding message in our petition, which has been our most successful petition we've run in the last 4 years since our inception as an organisation, by the way. And, as a nation, we really do need to start looking at things and saying, some things are so important to the fabric of our society that they cannot be changed or delayed. I could understand last year why the police and crime commissioners and some council elections were delayed. COVID had literally just happened. The country was, and the world really was in panic mode. Everyone thought it was going to be, in my opinion, a lot worse than it actually was going to be. And the government really were in a predicament really of, these aren't really essential elections to running the country. Let's just put them aside by a year and deal with that later. But this is for the running of my country, Wales. We need to be able to elect our government. And Welsh elections used to be every 4 years. But in the last few years, they've changed that to 5. So we've already had an extended term to what you usually would have. So to push that to 5.5 or 6 years is totally unprecedented.
And just finally, Matt, if these elections do go ahead in May, let's just presume that they do. Can you give us some sort of forecast of what you expect the result to look like, or is it too early to say?
I think it would be a Labour and Plaid Cymru coalition. I think Labour will lose their majority. I think Plaid Cymru won't do well, but between them, they will have enough numbers to form a decently sized coalition. But I think their opposition on the right of Welsh politics would abolish the Conservatives being the main opposition party, and if Reform makes some gains as well, could be quite substantial and something that they're not used to before. Previously, there's sort of been quite a lot of liberal centre ground opposition in Wales, but I think the right in Wales are pushing on, and I think there will be quite a substantial right-wing opposition in Wales for the first time. And
Matt, if there was a Labour-Plaid Cymru coalition, what sort of issues do you think would be really prominent in that coalition?
Well, I think for Plaid Cymru, independence is their number one motive, and I think that would be something they would want on the table within that parliament. And yes, the nationalist movement in Wales is growing; it is prominent. They are really pushing their own agenda here. There's a new movement on the horizon called Yes Cymru, who are pushing a strong campaign across Wales. And Unionists, in my opinion, are massively on the back foot, and they're not taking it seriously. If Boris Johnson and the British government paid a tenth as much attention to Wales they are in Scotland trying to deal with nationalism, they could really, stop nationalism in its tracks here in Wales. But I don't think they are taking it very seriously at all. And I think they're going to make the same mistake by letting nationalism rise to a certain level, 30, 40%, in Wales before they even start to take it seriously. But I think a referendum is something that will happen, I think, if Plaid Cymru get into power.
So you do see this issue rising in a similar way to the SNP and in Scotland now?
Massively. I think it will rise and rise. I think there's a more limited ceiling in Wales because, as we've seen from some polls, Wales is a very proud unionist country. There's quite a big English population that live in Wales. There's a huge population in Wales of Welsh people who have family over the border. I'm from a border county that, we just cross into England, into Herefordshire. It's not even like going to a different country. It's just home. We just pop over the border. So there is a lot of that going on as well, which will affect it. Their vote does seem to be much more in the west of Wales on the sort of shores facing towards Ireland. But I think it is an issue that they're going to push massively. I don't think they're going to get to the levels. I don't think there will be an independent Wales. But I think it is something they're going to push and keep driving for more and more devolved powers if they don't win the referendum, which will eventually lead to them sort of half separating from the UK anyway through devolution. So I think that they're on to a winner, whichever way they go.
Okay, Matt, fascinating insight as ever. Well, of course, we'll have to wait and see what actually happens in terms of the election. But Matthew McKinnon, director and founder of the Centre for Welsh Studies, I'm sure we'll speak again soon. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Take care.
Cheers.